Okay, thank you very much, Denise, and welcome everyone to our webinar today with the CFPB. We are so excited to have these individuals with us today. Um, so you heard from Denise, we have a few technical things, it'll be recorded, you'll receive the slides afterward, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go along. We will have some sections where we'll pause for questions toward the middle and then at the end. So I would first like to say the three that we have today are Sophie Sahaf, and she is the Deputy Assistant Director of the Community Affairs section. Sophie works on a variety of initiatives at the Bureau and brings significant background in economic development and poverty alleviation programs internationally and the US. She directed large structured investments in workforce, energy, and infrastructure for Indonesia, Mongolia, Sierra Leone, and operated a national nonprofit that brought financial and career coaching to families. We also have Denise Devon, Senior Program Advisor with the Community Affairs section. Denise works with the Your Money, Your Goals team, which you might have heard about that before. I know lots of our agencies use that. In promoting financial capability and integration in programs and systems that reduce poverty, she brings significant experience leading public policy, asset building, financial empowerment initiatives. She is a Kellogg National Fellow in Leadership with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And then we have Beverly Yang, Rent Content Lead in Consumer Education. An attorney by training, Beverly practiced housing and consumer law with the Land of Lincoln Legal Assistance Foundation in Southern Illinois for 7 years before she joined the Bureau in 2013. She wrote the content on the housing portal that is going to be shared today. So please join me in welcoming these three individuals. And with that, we can get started with Sophie. Excuse me, we're going to do the promise first. This is something we always do. You all welcome to say this with me at your own laptop. But so let's all say the promise of community action together. Community action changes people's lives, embodies a spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Now I can pass it over to Sophie. Thank you very much, and enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. That's a beautiful promise, and it really resonates and connects to why we're talking today, which is this really important conversation about how we can help the most vulnerable renters that are really struggling during these challenging times, and really appreciate you all taking time to be with us. We have been partnering with the community action agencies in many different ways at the CFPB, and we've always really valued it, and we are happy to be trying to partner here again today. And we hope you'll find the session informative and that you'll be able to walk away with ideas and how you can support renters in your communities even more than you're already doing now with our action-oriented resources that we're going to share more about today. So let's move on to the next slide, please. And we can go to the next slide again, please. So for those of you that might be less familiar with the CFPB, I just want to share a little bit about who we are. We're a federal agency. Our mission is to protect consumers. And we do this in a few ways. We write the rules and laws that financial institution and actors have to follow. We monitor their compliance with those laws. We take legal action against violators. And we inform consumers about their rights and protections. And that's one of the things we're doing right now with all of you is talking about some of the consumer rights, especially those for renters right now. I briefly need to run through this disclaimer here. This is a presentation that we're making on behalf of the CFPB. Doesn't constitute legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of the CFPB, and any of the opinions or views stated by any of us presenters are our own and may not represent the CFPB's. Next slide, please. So you've heard a little bit about us and who we are and where we come from, and we'd love to learn a little bit more about all of you. So if you would, could you please go to menti.com using the code on the screen and answer the question about what is your role. This is going to help us know who we're speaking to, and we can tailor a little bit what we share as we go through some of the rights and resources to support renters. So we should start to see responses come up on the screen shortly. And while you guys are filling that out, just note, please feel free to use the chat, enter in any reactions, questions, and we'll be monitoring it as we go through this conversation, through this webinar.
So we see in the chat, family service manager, while we're waiting for Menti to come up.
Housing coordinator too, working with renters and landlords. That's great. And maybe we keep using the chat while, if Menti's not quite working out. Grants and Special Projects Director, the State Association, and Program Manager of CARES Act Rental Assistance Program. That's wonderful. Bev is going to be sharing more about some of the rental assistance guidance and some of the new and some of the changes to it. All right, it's coming up. Great. So we see a lot of folks who are working directly with clients or customers. About 8 there. New folks from state associations and the like, and then over a dozen leadership managers. This is really helpful. Appreciate you all being here, and we think all of this information will be really helpful that you can use directly with clients or that you can share throughout your organizations to get them to the folks working with clients and help them be aware of their rights and some of these resources. Fantastic. So let's go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Great. All right. So let's start a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the problem first. Why are we bringing this up? Why are we having this conversation? Then after doing that, we'll talk a little bit more about the protections and rights we want you to all be aware of and make sure you have more information on. And then Denise will share more about ways to help get the word out, because a big problem is that a lot of consumers aren't aware of their rights or options. There are 8.8 million families that are behind on rent and that could be at risk of losing their home. And so that is why we're here to talk to you today. 8.8 million families or households. And there is some good news though, and that is that eviction can be prevented in many cases because renters do have a number of rights and protections and assistance available to them. However, they're not automatic. People need to take action to take advantage of those rights and of that assistance. And we need all the help we can get to make renters more aware of those rights and the steps to take, and that's where we really are excited to be partnering with you here on this effort. We can go to the next slide. I want to share a little bit of basics on who renters are by income. So as you are very aware, I'm sure most low-income families and households tend to be renters. So that is, if you're low income, you're more likely to be in rental housing than not. And as we see on this slide, 69% or over 2/3 of our low income families are renters. But of course, you know, all income groups have renters in them, but low income families are most likely to be renters, and we know they're struggling, especially right now. So we're very focused on how to make sure they know their rights, and the steps they can take to protect themselves. Moving to the next slide, here we see who renters are from a little more of a race and ethnicity lens. And you can see here each of the different racial ethnic groups on the left-hand side of this chart, showing the proportion of each of those groups that are renting their homes. So we have Black and African Americans at the top, Hispanic or Latinos, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, American Indians, Alaska Natives, and of course white, not Hispanic. So here, if you're a racial or ethnic minority, you're more likely to be a renter, and we want to simply underscore that when we are talking about these 8.8 million families or households behind on rent, these racial ethnic minority groups tend to be disproportionately impacted by this ongoing crisis. So moving on to the next slide, we also want to show a little bit about how this looks geographically. Who are the renters that might be facing more risks of eviction? And you might find interesting to see your own state on this slide, on the screen right now, alongside others. And definitely encourage you to take a look more closely offline. This piques your curiosity. So when you look at this slide, when you see the darker colors, the darker the state, what that means is the higher the percent of renters in those states that are behind on rent and are saying they think they're going to be evicted in the next couple of months. So this gives you a sense of where we see the risk of eviction or the likelihood of eviction being higher or lower. And I want to note, though, of course, within any state, there are going to be pockets where cities or localities where it's particularly worse, even if overall the trend, regardless of the overall trend, and especially that'll be true in bigger states like California, New York, and Texas. There still might be very high need in some pockets or areas of their states. So we've talked a little bit about the problem. If we move to the next slide, we're going to shift gears a little bit and start talking a little more about the CFPB's housing portal. That is why we're here today, to really share more about this important resource that we put together to meet the need at this time of building awareness of these rights and protections. So this portal that the CFPB created with some of our federal partners, it's a free website to help renters, to help homeowners know their rights, what they need to do, the specific steps they need to take, the actions to get the help or get the protections, and where they can go if they need help. So CFPB started this portal in late 2020 as we have a mandate, to support related to the housing market and to informing consumers about their protections writ large. And we've collaborated with partners in the federal government, agencies like Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Veterans Affairs, FHFA, to bring together information resources to support renters and homeowners. So you see a little screenshot of what the Housing Hub looks like in the bottom corner. And you can see that it might be hard to see on the screen right now, but there's a get help if you're a renter, the third circle there. And that's where you'll go, where people go on the main page of the Housing Hub to access all of the information available to support renters. And this CFPB housing portal is all about making information easy to digest, easy to understand what the steps are to take and what the assistance is that's available. So we'll go through some of what's in the portal on the next slide. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see some of the things that are covered are eviction moratoriums. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. A new CFPB debt collection rule. We'll also talk about that a little bit more, along with emergency rental assistance, important funds available for folks, federal laws against discrimination in housing, and some of the state and local tenant protections that are available that are also really important for folks to know about, because they can they might offer greater protections than the federal ones in some cases. So let's hear from you again. We're going to go to the next slide and do a little poll to find out a little bit about how familiar you all are with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's declaration form. How many of you have seen that form? We'd love to hear from you. It'll help us, again, decide how far we go into this. And there's no right or wrong answer. Great, and we're seeing in the chat some folks saying yes, as well as on the screen, we can see a lot of folks who have seen it and have some familiarity with it, but still almost 10 not, and a few not sure. That's all fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And now let's see if there's a couple more answers coming in before I move on. Wonderful. So we have 19 saying yes, you've seen the CDC's declaration form, now 20, 12 saying no, and 4 not quite sure. So let's go into the next slide and we can start talking a little bit more about the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention moratorium. Great. So many of you are probably, or many of you are aware of the eviction moratorium by the CDC that gives many renters the right to halt evictions due to not paying rent. And there are a few things we want to underscore. One is that a lot of renters don't know that this protection is available to them. This protection expires June 30th, and one of the big reasons we're talking to you and many others is to help get the word out to as many renters as possible that there is this CDC moratorium that can halt evictions for not paying rent. And so Denise will share more about how you can help with that. But that we want people to be very clear about, that a lot of folks don't know about this. And that even when people might be aware of this, they often don't know that they have to take steps, take action to receive the protection from this moratorium. It's not enough to just be eligible. Folks need to complete, sign, and send the declaration letter from the CDC to their landlord or the landlord's agent, like a property manager. A couple things I want to note, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the eligibility criteria and the like, is that there are, in some cases, state or local governments that are offering stronger protections for tenants than what the CDC moratorium provides, either a longer timeline or different levels of protections. If you might be aware of what those are in your locality where you are, and if you're not, evictionlab.org provides information to help you understand what your locality offers and how then you want to, how your clients or customers may be able to take advantage of those. One important thing though is if you're ever in doubt, no harm, just tenants should fill out that declaration form, sign it, send it to their landlord. No negative to doing that. And remember that if it ever gets complicated, you can always refer clients to legal aid. We say this in bold here, and we'll say it again as we go, because legal aid is a really valuable resource for you and your clients to understand the ins and outs of some of these complicated laws and protections, and if things start to get challenging for them, if they're facing an eviction claim or the like. So just know that legal aid is a really important resource. Moving into the next slide, many of you, I think it was over 20, had seen the form, and I'm sure many of you have helped clients or customers with completing this form and probably could share a thing or two with us, and we welcome hearing anything you want to offer or share with us. It helps us be smarter about what's happening on the ground. So first and foremost, so when it comes to this order, we want to talk about the coverage. So it covers most housing that includes subsidized housing, mobile home lots, places with or without a lease. And so that's really important to be aware of. The second thing is about eligibility. The CDC did a really great job of simplifying how to determine if you're eligible recently. And there's two main things required to be eligible for the CDC moratorium on evictions. And that is, one, on income eligibility, you have to be able to demonstrate that either you got a stimulus check in 2020 or 2021, that could mean you're eligible. If you didn't report income in 2020, or if your clients are receiving food stamps or TANF or welfare, SSI or SSDI, they're likely to be eligible on the income criteria. The second criteria is that they're experiencing financial hardship that's making it difficult to pay rent. And Denise later on is going to show the form. For those of you who haven't seen it, 2 pages, simple, very user-friendly, and easy to read through and fill out. And so that's a little bit about the eligibility and what it covers. We want to just also remind that folks that tenants need to fill it out, sign it, send it, and ideally keep a copy for their records in case any issues arise. And remember, it's not automatic. That action is required. Those steps need to be gone through to halt eviction for not being able to pay rent. The form is, of course, available online in English and many other languages. It's on our website. It's hyperlinked here. So please, so we want you to know about that and appreciate all of your help helping folks be more aware of this right and protection and how they can take advantage of it. Want you to also just know briefly that if a tenant or client you work with has filled this out before, they don't need to fill it out again. I think that's important given the change made to make it better. Not required to complete it a second time or third time or anything like that. No need to resubmit. So that's a little bit on the CDC's eviction moratorium and how it protects tenants and how folks can fill it out and take advantage of it. Moving into the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about a rule that the CFPB put out around debt collection. So this new rule that we put out just in May, early May, gives tenants the right to be notified of the CDC moratorium and possibly of some of the state or local eviction protections too. So what does this law entail? So first, it applies to debt collectors. It's a debt collector rule. It's May 3, 2021 onwards that it's relevant, that it's applicable. And it's relevant in situations where a debt collector is trying to evict a tenant for not paying rent. And the CDC moratorium might apply to that tenant. So operative question, key question here, who's a debt collector in this context? So debt collectors generally include people, companies who are regularly collecting unpaid debt for creditors, and they're collecting this unpaid debt for creditors after the debts are due. There are many eviction attorneys are debt collectors if they're regularly collecting debt. So how should you think about this rule? How might it be relevant for you and your clients as you're working with them? If someone is trying to evict you or someone you work with, and they're not given notice of the CDC eviction moratorium and that protection for tenants for non-payment, then this rule might apply to them. So I'm going to say that one more time. If someone is trying to evict a tenant or someone you work with, and that tenant was not given notice about that CDC moratorium protection, then they may be protected from eviction by this rule. So what can you do in that situation if you're hearing that in a conversation with one of your clients? If you hear your client's being evicted, refer them to a local legal services attorney. They can help them figure out if this rule in fact protects them or not and what they can do to get some protection from it. I also will note any violations of this law you might come across or hear about can be reported to us. We receive complaints of violations of laws that we oversee and regulate that come from us. So we'll share in a few more minutes when we talk about some of our resources, exactly how, where to go, where to find, how to submit a complaint if something like that happens and the opportunity arises. So moving into the next slide, I think we've shared a lot of information with all of you on just these few protections just now, and Bev is about to share a little more about rental assistance in a couple minutes. So just want to note, you're not expected to remember all of this. It's a lot of information. As Bev always reminds us, she's been doing legal aid. She did legal aid for many years, and it's a lot to retain. And that's why this website was created, to break it all down and put it all together so you don't have to remember it all, and it's there as a resource. And there's step-by-step instructions on the Housing Hub on all of these pieces you see on the slide: avoiding eviction, getting help with rent and utilities, making a plan on how to catch up on rent, knowing those tenant and debt collection rights, some of which we just talked about, and some of the local experts folks can go to, like legal aid. And if we move to the next slide, this also shares a little more information that you'll also find on the Housing Hub, such as tenant protections, the rights for domestic violence survivors, folks that might be experiencing housing discrimination and how they can report it. We also explain who tenants can report landlords to, whether it's an issue related to discrimination, housing discrimination, if there's a violation possibly of a state or local housing law. Again, if there's a violation of the debt collection rule I referenced earlier, requiring notice of the CDC moratorium. And so this page here that there's a screenshot of, and there's a link below, gives you those pieces of information. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll briefly say, we always like to say that while there's a lot of valuable information on the Housing Hub, when it comes to a legal bind, as I referenced earlier, Legal Aid, wonderful resource. They can help you know the local rules and those ins and outs as well as the federal. If they can't represent you, because sometimes bandwidth can be an issue, they often will give advice by phone or by email. And there have been more resources to Legal Aid, so that helps them have greater bandwidth to support folks struggling with eviction cases or other housing insecurity issues. There are also housing counselors. Some of you may do this in your day-to-day work right now, and I think you all are quite familiar with housing counselors, but just to say that they can really help understand rights, very valuable for rental assistance, utility assistance, how to access that, what to do, and some of that making a plan and how to figure out how to pay back overdue rent, whether that means a repayment agreement with a landlord, maybe even finding new affordable housing, and of course they can also refer to Legal Aid. So now I'm going to pass on to our Legal Aid expert, Bev Young, who is going to share more about rental assistance.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Yes, so there are a lot of plugs for Legal Aid here. I am a little bit biased because I came from Legal Aid, and I know how important it is to work collaboratively with community action partners. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about emergency rental assistance and some changes that we saw from Treasury recently, and then we can get into questions. So thanks so much for your questions in the chat, and I will get to those in a second. So as many of you know, I mean, I see state administrators of ERAP, program managers for emergency rental assistance distribution. There are so many folks here who are probably quite intimately, maybe even more intimately familiar with emergency rental assistance. But I wanted to cover some basics, and then we'll get into some more details. So there's roughly $45 billion in stimulus funding that came from two different congressional appropriations, and money can be used to cover rent, utilities, and other housing costs. The payments under the old program, I'm going to refer to old and new programs because there were two pots of money, and the first pot came from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and the second came from the American Rescue Plan. You don't have to worry about that, except to that I may refer to them as the first pot of money or the second pot of money, or ERA1 and ERA2. So payments usually went directly to landlords and utility companies under ERA1, and money can be available to help with moving costs. If you haven't already seen, there is this great rental assistance directory from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, but many of you may be familiar with your local ERAP program as well. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about recent revisions. So this is a screenshot from that rental assistance directory that I just mentioned, and it's where we send people to find their local program, in many cases your programs, for those of you on the call. And I'll talk a little bit now about some revisions to guidance that Treasury recently gave us. So there are these two programs, ERAP 1 and ERAP 2. On May 7th, Treasury announced new guidance on how those funds should be distributed. And the rules generally depend on whether the money comes from ERA 1 or ERA 2. For ERA 1, the rules are that the wait time for assistance has been cut in half. So programs were required to reach out to landlords and find out if the landlord wanted to participate in the ERAP program. In many cases, we learned programs were not giving the funds directly to renters after that waiting period was over. This new guidance says that wait time should be cut in half to 7 instead of 14 days if reaching out by mail, or 5 instead of 10 days when reaching out by phone, text, or email. And then Treasury also strongly encourages programs to be giving that money directly to renters, even if the landlord refuses to participate. The thing about ERA 1 and ERA 2 is that ERA 2 money you may not see yet, and so the guidance is new, and programs may just be getting around to operationalizing this guidance. For both the old and the new programs, landlords who receive direct payments for future rent are prohibited from evicting tenants for not paying rent during the months that are covered by rental assistance. So if my landlord gets payment for 3 months between now and where are we? June, July, August, then they should not evict me for non-payment during those months. There's also a strong encouragement not to evict for months when landlords get direct payments for back rent. The new guidance also strongly encourages assistance to renters in finding new housing, and that can include security deposits, future rent, moving expenses, even temporary stays in a motel or hotel if the family's been displaced. And as I said, you may not see programs operationalizing guidance for the new money, ERA 2, but important to know that in addition to what I just mentioned, this money can be used to provide assistance to renters directly and immediately after their application is reviewed. Programs don't need to reach out to landlords first. And then the guidance also says that programs should not deny assistance to eligible tenants just because they live in federally subsidized housing. So that's a lot to cover. And I'm going to, first let me speak to any questions about the emergency rental assistance, and then I can scroll back and answer some of the questions that people had about the CDC moratorium and other things.
Hi, Beverly. We do have several questions that have come in so far, and they are questions related to the CDC moratorium, and we don't have any specifically for the ERAP program at this time, but would you like to hear the rest of them?
Sure. I actually see one question about ERAP, and that was about whether states are required to allow future payments. I don't think that is, so I'm not from Treasury, and this is not, I can't provide you with legal guidance, but there is an allowance. Programs can give assistance for future rent up to 3 months at a time. but there's no requirement that I know of that says you have to provide both assistance with back rent and future rent. So when programs do decide to give help with future rent, then that's when this rule applies. Starting May 7th for both funds, when future help with future rent is given, that directly to a landlord. So not when the payment is made directly to the tenant, but as a condition of that payment directly to the landlord, then they're prohibited from evicting for the period covered by those rental assistance payments. I hope that helps. So I also wrote down a question that I saw earlier about evicting despite the CDC moratorium. And I think that the term eviction can be confusing because it covers many things, right? Eviction, to some people, that means when they get an eviction notice. We know, unfortunately, a lot of people move out when they receive an eviction notice. But then there's also the eviction hearing that happens if your landlord files an eviction. And after the hearing, there's a judgment, right? Either for or against the tenant. And some people know that as a writ of possession. If the tenant loses, then the landlord may get a writ of possession that says, here, you have the right to possess your home again. You have the right to get rid of the tenant and have them removed from the home. And so the way that the CDC moratorium is using eviction is it applies to the point at which a tenant is removed. And so many, if state or local protections aren't stopping evictions before stopping the filing of evictions, then many cases can go all the way through from notice of eviction to going to court and even getting a judgment. Only that judgment, the sheriff isn't allowed to carry that out. And that is really the piece of eviction that the CDC moratorium applies to. I hope that helps answer your question. I think that there was a question also about contracts for payment of rent. So in some cases, landlords or property managers may enter into a contract for payment of back rent. And then when the tenant fails to pay, then they can try to seek an eviction. So this is really fact specific, and obviously, you know, I don't know all the facts of the case, and I can't speak specifically about anyone's personal case. But as I said before, the CDC moratorium really applies to the removal phase of eviction, and so there may be cases where a landlord can start the eviction process because someone failed to pay according to the payment plan that they entered into. And then the CDC moratorium, I think I also saw a question about is a landlord a debt collector? So in the CDC, in our new rule, we say that when you're a debt collector seeking to evict a tenant, that is, when you give your first notice of eviction or you file a case in court, then you need to give some notice about the moratoriums that may apply. So the CDC moratorium, and then maybe even a state or local moratorium. But what's important to note is that most landlords are probably not debt collectors. It's very fact specific, but debt collectors are generally people who collect money for someone else after that debt is due. And so that applies in many cases to eviction lawyers and other people who are collecting after the debt becomes due. But the answer is no, it generally probably doesn't apply to the landlord themselves. Okay, so I think
we do have a few more questions if you'd like to respond to those now. There's some a couple of more state specific type questions. And one of them is referencing the CDC moratorium expiring on June 30th. And the governor of Florida lifted quite a few of the protections for renters. Is that correct? Is it happening in other states? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So states around the country, states and territories are creating their own rules, and it's uneven. It's very different. So that's part of the reason why the CDC issued a moratorium to cover the places that are less protected. So if your state or local government has a stronger protection from eviction, then that applies instead of the CDC moratorium. And the CDC moratorium is designed to protect everybody else. Of course, if your state or local protection ends before June 30th, then it no longer provides more protection than the CDC moratorium. So then you can still use the declaration, the CDC declaration, and get protected under the federal law.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question as well. There are a couple questions about property management as well, and maybe you spoke to these a little bit, but this one is talking about clients being offered a separate contract for payment of back rent, and then if the renter defaults on the contract, they're evicting them. Is that something that's legal that you've heard of?
Yeah, so that's the case where I think it's hard to say without knowing all of the facts. But as someone else said in the chat, the CDC moratorium only stops evictions for non-payment of rent. So evictions for other reasons don't apply. When it's when the tenant's being evicted for breaking an agreement to pay rent, you know, my personal take on that is that that is eviction for non-payment, and the CDC moratorium would apply. But again, it applies to the removal stage of eviction, and at least at the federal level, doesn't necessarily limit landlords from filing the eviction because the tenant failed to abide by the repayment plan.
Got it. There's another question from an attendee that's talking about the type of eviction again. And so we're talking about the non-payment evictions, but not other types of evictions like nuisance, end of lease, tenant at will, correct?
That's right. I can say that there are lawyers who are fighting evictions for instance, the end of when a lease term ends. There's litigation about, you know, whether landlords should be able to evict for that reason. But at this point, at least from what I know of the federal CDC order, that is not a prohibited reason for eviction.
And one more question, if you could respond to the federal judge last week striking down or vacating the CDC moratorium. And they're wondering, what does CFPB plan to do? Are the rules still in place if that moratorium is eliminated?
So that's a great question. It is the Department of Justice who's defending the government and the CDC moratorium. And so we actually have an agency line not to talk about that ongoing litigation. Those are my standing orders. But I can say that is that our requirement that debt collectors tell people about the CDC moratorium definitely rests on there being a CDC moratorium. So if that is completely lifted for the entire country, then it won't apply anywhere, and then debt collectors won't need to give that notice. However, in our rule, we also talk about how debt collectors, such as eviction attorneys, can make unfair, deceptive, wrong statements about people's eligibility for the moratorium, how it works, and they should be on notice that making misleading or deceptive statements when they're trying to collect a debt can violate the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So that was also part of the rule, and that will continue to be the case even if the moratorium does end.
Great. Thanks, Beverly. In the interest of time, everyone, please keep entering your questions in the chat, but let's go ahead and continue on with the next slides. Thank you, everybody.
So I'll take over from here. I'm Denise Devon, and I want to thank my colleague Bev and my colleague Sophie, and of course our great colleagues from the CAP system throughout the country. I've had the privilege of working with community action agencies, gosh, for over 25 years, and I want to offer to you some way of thinking about these resources. At the local level, you are inundated with resources, and we get that. And we know that you work in a variety of contexts throughout the country. You are the housing counselor in many of the rural communities. You are the energy assistance provider. You work with families and children. You work with elderly. You work with single people. And so what we want to just invite you to do is to take a look at the resources that Bev and her colleagues and Sophie have all put together and think about how you could share these resources. If you're an executive or senior leadership or a manager, to your teams. If you are a frontline, working directly with clients, consider texting, consider the conversation, consider all the ways in which you're communicating, putting flyers into food bags or home visiting if that's going on in this COVID environment. So what I want to do is I want to share with you a couple of things to just, and I'm trying to do the share, so I can't quite get it. So I'm going to have to ask you to move to the next slide, please. All right, so here we are. I've got this all ready to go. So when we start to talk about this new declaration form, this is what's on our website. It is such a much easier form to use. So that's the first thing. I want to share the form with you. I want to show you the various parts of the website. I want to show you a flyer. I want to offer to you a couple of social media posts and of course a video. So this eviction protection declaration form, this is what it looks like. This is what Bev and Sophie have been referring to. Do I qualify? Have I received a stimulus? And I'm not going to go through all of this right now, but this is what it looks like. Probably eligible if you're on SNAP or TANF or SSI or SSDI, etc. My declaration that I qualify, and people would check this, and then of course they sign it. So this is what the declaration form, and you're so used to government forms throughout the country and have been since your beginning. So I want you to see that. The other thing I want you to see is I want you to see our website. And when we've been talking about this website, it's really easy to find, like really easy. It's consumerfinance.gov. Very easy, consumerfinance.gov. When you go to the first page, the messages were on your side. That's a given. And you're going to see on the left-hand side, support around all the coronavirus supports that there are. The Bureau has curated all of this from all the federal agencies and other supports. On the right-hand side is help for homeowners and renters. And this is what Sophie and Bev have referred to. On the left-hand side, help for mortgages. On the right-hand side, help if you're a renter. When you click inside on the right-hand side, it's so easy, 7 languages. So it's very easy. Take action to avoid eviction. Get help with rent and utility. They're going to be referring to you. Make a plan to catch up on rent. Know what your tenant and debt collection rights are. talk to a local expert. So in these links, you're going to have all the resources that you need. Sign the declaration form, download it from here. Reach out to the eviction lab, find eviction protections, ask the landlord if they're getting mortgage help. And then there's things here for the CARES Act, etc. Help for rent and utilities, that's you in most areas of the country. Income recertification, making a plan to catch up on rent. This connects into our Your Money, Your Goals resources. So this page is your value add, we would suggest. And so what I want to do is I want to just show this to you, and I want to stop now, and I want to show you a few slides. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the next slide will show a video that we can't show because of the audio. We can't do it in this system. Let's go to the next slide, please. And this video is only 2 minutes long, and it shows and tells and explains what to do if you're a renter. It shows and tells and explains in 2 minutes how you can help and support a renter. And it's really good. I've seen a lot of these. This is one of the better ones. Next slide, please. So that's one resource for you. The declaration page, the website, the video. These resources are in 7 languages: traditional Chinese, Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, Arabic, etc. Let's go to the next slide. Then the other thing I want to talk with you about, let's go to the next slide. I want to skip over this for a minute. I want to talk with you about a couple of messages that you could use. These are social media messages, or you could send them by email, or you could put them in a text. But basically, it's hard to read here, but basically it says, the first one says, are you having trouble paying rent due to the coronavirus? Learn what protections you qualify for and resources are available to you. And then it's got the links. That's a text or an email or a plug and play or a newsletter or a blog or a blast, or putting into a food basket or handing to a parent in a home or center visit. Are you struggling to pay rent? That's the second one. Due to the coronavirus, you may have protections to help you avoid eviction. The third one says, for the estimated 8.8 million households, a lot of them with children, are you behind on rent? Help is available. So the social media messages that we offer to you and the links are easy to just plug and play. Then we've got the videos both in English and in Spanish. And again, I can't say they're really, really good. So think about yourself as a manager, as an executive, as a frontline, partner in your work. No matter what program you work in, it is, except for weatherization, it is likely you're dealing with renters all over the place. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a flyer. On the left-hand side, it's in English. On the right-hand side, it's in Spanish. And this flyer has all the other supports that are available. Avoiding eviction and foreclosure in English and in Spanish. Dealing with student loans in English and in Spanish. Staying on top of bills. I mean, we are well aware of the crisis people are experiencing. Even with their EIP payments, the child tax credit hasn't come yet. The expanded earned income tax credit hasn't come yet. People are struggling and there are evictions going on. So to stay on top of bills in English and in Spanish, caring for the family's budget in English and in Spanish, steering clear of scams. On our main website, you can link in and see all the different scams that are going on. And of course, that's under, the Bureau's, Bureau deals with a lot of scams. One of the things I should have showed you on the website is how to submit a complaint. So if you go to consumerfinance.gov, upper right-hand corner, you can submit a complaint if you have concern about financial scams and abuse and that kind of thing. And then finally, knowing your rights. So this particular flyer in English and in Spanish will help people that you work with get to the resources that they need. We've only got about 3 minutes left, and I think what I want to do right now is just move on to the next slide, please, and let's ask the question. This is a link for how you can sign up for our listservs. We don't send your name anywhere else, and they're good. You can get up to the minute information on a lot of different areas. Let's go to the next slide. So the question we want to ask in Mentee right now is how, not if, how will you help to get the word out? Let us know what you're already doing. Use Mentee right now. I'm going to ask our friends at National Cap if you can put in the code again, and let's see if we can get some responses. If you can't, yes, here you go. So how will you help us get these resources out? Let's see what you come up with. Think as a manager, as an executive, as a senior program person, as a PR person, as a frontline person working directly with clients. How can you best help get these resources to the people that you work with? And the CAPs, we know cover sometimes 19 counties. That's your service delivery area. You've got your boards that are a third are public sector, a third are low income, a third are leaders in the community. Think about your networks that you're all a part of, your housing networks, your family networks, what is all the different networks that you're a part of. And we need to partner with you, and we hope that you'll continue to partner with us. And again, we have 2 minutes left, so we're seeing things like on our site, through our agency, social media, blasts. Can you talk to us specifically about how you talk directly with renters or homeowners for sure too? How can you communicate with them by text, by email, on the phone, in person? How will you, because a simple question is, are you worried you're going to be evicted? Have you been told of what you can do? That's two simple questions, kind of coaching questions. Are you worried you've been going to be evicted? Have you been told what you can do? And if they haven't, hand them this stuff. That's what I would offer to all of us. So we've got office flyers, we've got interagency groups, we've got agency websites, we've got email blasts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let me stop here and turn it over to our good colleague, Ashley, and thank all of you for participating today. We had over 80 of us today. Ashley, back to you.
Thanks, Denise. We had quite a few people joining this webinar. So thank you so much, Denise and Sophie and Beverly, for this wonderful conversation. If there were any questions that we did not get answered in the chat, we'll be sending out more information afterwards. So if there's anything else that you have questions about, you can always email any of us. We do have a few more slides to share with you about some upcoming items for national partnership. So we'll get those here for you. Just wanted to remind everyone, we do have leadership coaching and technical assistance. We do encourage new executive directors and other leaders at your agencies to utilize this opportunity. We do have some information about signing up, and you can contact Lana Shope or Lily Seals with the National Partnership to learn more about that information. Next slide. And then next week on the 19th, we do have a convening, Becoming a Health Organization. Dr. Denise Shervington is going to be our presenter. That is on the 19th at 3 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Eastern. We also are going to continue our crisis management and crisis communications series, resilience toolkit and webinar series. And that's with Melanie Lockwood Herman with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. That is on May 20th. And then continuing that toolkit and webinar series, we have Ready or Not, creating practical action-oriented readiness plans into June. So that one is on June 17th. And then we have the part 6 in the series, Ready to Serve, how to build and equip a crisis-ready response team, on July 15th. And of course, if you would like any more info on any of our upcoming webinars, or if you have any random questions that you'd like to ask the CARES team, we have Erin, Lana, and my emails there for you. We also have a wonderful survey we'd like you to fill out after this webinar. We do have that in the chat, but you'll also see it in follow-up. So with that, Denise, Beverly, and Sophie, thank you so much. Do you have any last minute things you'd like to tell the group?
Just thank you, everybody. We know how busy you are. We know how overwhelmed it is in the community. We get it. We come from the field. Just please reach out to us. There were so many questions we couldn't answer, but please reach out to us. You've got the contact information here. And I think that's what I want to say. Sophie, back to you.
A huge thank you to everyone for the work you do every day already. We know you're doing a lot, and we appreciate your partnership here on this effort to continue supporting renters and helping them be aware of these rights. Please reach out, please email us, please follow our website, and we'll keep putting helpful information there. We hope it's valuable for you all. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Ashley, and the rest of the NCAP leadership.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.